The phone call that destroyed my marriage came at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right when I was reviewing blueprints for another soulless strip mall. The school nurse's voice cut through my afternoon like a rusty blade. "Mr. Turner, you need to come get Tessa. She's collapsed." My name is Will Turner, and until that moment, I thought my biggest problem was my wife Amelia's obsession with feeding our 8-year-old daughter nothing but rabbit food. Turns out, I was spectacularly wrong about a lot of things. "What do you mean, collapsed?" I asked Mrs. Patel, the school nurse who had the bedside manner of a drill sergeant and twice the honesty of most adults I knew. "I mean, she fainted during math class. When's the last time this child ate actual food, Mr. Turner? And I don't mean whatever organic, free-range, blessed by unicorns nonsense is in that lunchbox." I was already grabbing my keys, my engineering mind automatically calculating drive time versus panic time. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Make it 10, and bring a sandwich. A real one." The drive to Meadowbrook Elementary gave me just enough time to catalog the warning signs I'd been ignoring, like how Amelia had transformed from the woman who used to sneak pizza at midnight into someone who treated cheese like it was liquid Satan, or how our grocery bills had somehow doubled while our actual food decreased to the point where our refrigerator looked like a sad produce section. But the biggest warning sign? The way Tessa had started looking at me with those big, hungry eyes every time I ate a normal meal. Kids don't lie with their eyes, not like adults do. I found Amelia already in the nurse's office, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair catching the fluorescent light as she hovered over our daughter like a nervous bird. She looked up when I walked in, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance that I'd shown up at all. "Will, thank God," she said, but her voice had that careful quality it got when she was performing for an audience. "I told them it's probably just a growth spurt. Kids get tired, right?" Mrs. Patel, bless her practical soul, opened Tessa's lunchbox like she was presenting evidence in a homicide trial. "Mr. Turner, this is what your daughter brought for lunch today." I stared into the small container. Raw spinach leaves. Some kind of sprout that looked like it belonged in a science experiment. A handful of what might have been nuts, if nuts grew up wanting to be disappointments. "Jesus Christ, Amelia. Don't swear in front of Tessa," she snapped, then caught herself and softened her voice. "It's a very nutritious meal, Will. Just because it's not processed garbage doesn't mean—" "It's not a meal," Mrs. Patel interrupted with the authority of someone who'd seen this particular brand of parental stupidity before. "It's what my meal eats." Tessa was sitting on the cot, pale and small, watching us argue over her head like she'd done something wrong. That's when I felt the first real spark of anger. Not at the situation, but at the woman I'd married. "Sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to Tessa's level, "how long has Mommy been packing lunches like this?" "A while," she whispered, glancing nervously at Amelia. "Since she started going to those meetings with Aunt Jess." Aunt Jess. Not really Tessa's aunt, just Amelia's best friend, and the kind of woman who treated every conversation like a recruitment opportunity for whatever cause had captured her attention that week. Last year it was essential oils. This year, apparently, it was starving children. "What meetings?" I asked, but Amelia was already standing, gathering her purse with sharp, efficient movements. "We can discuss this at home," she said. "Tessa needs rest, not an interrogation." Mrs. Patel cleared her throat. "Actually, Mr. Turner, I need to speak with you privately before you leave." The conversation that followed was brief and terrifying. Words like malnutrition and child protective services and mandatory reporting floated around the small office like toxic gas. Mrs. Patel explained in her wonderfully blunt way that if Tessa's condition didn't improve immediately, she'd have no choice but to make some phone calls that would bring people with clipboards and legal authority into our lives. "I've been teaching for 23 years, she said after Amelia had taken Tessa to the car. "I've seen this before. Your wife's gotten involved with one of those groups, hasn't she? The raw food people?" "I honestly don't know," I admitted. She's been different lately. Secretive. They call it a lifestyle, but it's really a cult. They prey on insecure women, usually ones going through some kind of crisis, marriage problems, career stress, aging anxiety. They promise purification and enlightenment, but what they really deliver is isolation and control. I thought about Amelia's new friends, her mysterious evening meetings, the way she'd started looking at me like I was contaminated whenever I ate normal food. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. What do I do? Mrs. Patel's expression softened just slightly. You protect your daughter, whatever it takes. That evening, I made Tessa a grilled cheese sandwich and watched her eat it like she was afraid someone might take it away. Amelia had disappeared into her home office immediately after we got home, claiming she had important calls to make. Through the thin walls of our suburban house, I could hear fragments of her conversation. Words like cleansing and toxic influences and resistance to change. She was talking to someone about me, I realized, discussing my obvious failure to embrace whatever enlightened path she'd discovered. Daddy, Tessa said around a mouthful of sandwich, am I in trouble? No, baby, you're not in trouble at all. Mommy says regular food makes people sick, but I don't feel sick now. I sat down across from her at our kitchen table, the same table where we used to eat pancakes on Sunday mornings before Amelia decided that flour was apparently a gateway illegal substance to spiritual damnation. Sometimes grown-ups get confused about what's best, I said carefully, but making sure you're healthy and strong is the most important thing, more important than anything else. She nodded solemnly, then asked the question that broke my heart. Are you and Mommy getting divorced? Kids always know. They pick up on the tension, the careful conversations, the way their parents stop touching each other without realizing it. Tessa had been watching our marriage dissolve in real time, probably blaming herself the way kids do. I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever happens, you'll be okay. I promise. After Tessa went to bed, I did what any rational man would do when his world started falling apart. I opened a beer and did some investigating. Amelia's laptop was password protected, but she'd never been particularly creative with security. Her password was still Tessa 2016, the year our daughter was born, back when Amelia still believed in things like birthday cake and Christmas cookies. Her browser history told the story I'd been too stupid or too trusting to see. Websites about raw food diets and spiritual cleansing, forums dedicated to breaking free from toxic relationships, and dozens of visits to something called the Pure Life Collective, which sounded like either a wellness group or a very pretentious grocery store. The Pure Life Collective's website was a masterpiece of pseudo-spiritual nonsense. Photos of thin, ethereally beautiful people holding vegetables like they were religious artifacts. Testimonials from transformed souls who'd discovered the secret to true health and happiness. And at the center of it all, a woman calling herself Mother Gaia, who looked like she'd stepped out of a yoga magazine and into a position of dangerous authority. But it was the private messages that really got my attention. Amelia had been corresponding with someone named Henry Bell for months. Dr. Henry Bell, according to his profile. And their conversations had evolved from discussions about nutrition to something much more personal. I feel so alive when we talk, Amelia had written just 3 days ago, like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be. You deserve someone who understands your journey, Henry had replied. Someone who can appreciate your transformation instead of holding you back. There were dozens of messages like this, each one more intimate than the last. References to private meetings, shared meals, raw, presumably, and plans for a future that apparently didn't include me. The most recent exchange made my hands shake with rage. Will is becoming a real problem, Amelia had written. He's poisoning Tessa against the lifestyle, filling her with toxic food and some toxic ideas. I'm worried about her spiritual development. Children are resilient, Henry had replied. Once she's away from negative influences, she'll adapt quickly. The retreat center would be perfect for her adjustment period. How long do you think the adjustment would take? As long as necessary. Some children need months to fully detox from their previous conditioning. I read that exchange 3 times, my engineering brain trying to process what I was seeing. They were talking about taking my daughter away. Not for a weekend camping trip or a summer vacation, but for an indefinite period of adjustment at some kind of facility where they could reshape her thinking. My wife was planning to abduct our child in the name of spiritual enlightenment. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. Upstairs, Tessa was probably sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, her belly full of actual food. Down the hall, Amelia was presumably planning my elimination from their lives. The smart thing would have been to call a lawyer immediately. Document everything, file for emergency custody, let the legal system sort out the mess. But I've never been accused of being smart when I'm angry, and I was angrier than I'd ever been in my life. Instead, I decided to do some field work. The next evening, I told Amelia I was working late and followed her to one of her meetings. She drove across town to a converted warehouse in the arts district, the kind of place where people went to pretend they were more creative and enlightened than everyone else. The Pure Life Collective's meeting space looked exactly like what you'd expect from a group of people who thought vegetables were a religion. Yoga mats arranged in a circle, crystals scattered around like expensive paperweights, and enough incense burning to violate several fire codes. I watched through a window as about 20 people sat in lotus position, listening to a woman who had to be Mother Gaia herself. She was older than her website photos suggested, probably mid-50s, with the kind of ageless beauty that comes from good genetics and expensive skincare rather than raw food enlightenment. But it was the man sitting next to Amelia who caught my attention. Tall, lean, with the kind of carefully maintained beard that screamed, "I'm a doctor, but also a free spirit." He kept touching Amelia's arm during the presentation, small, intimate gestures that made my vision go red around the edges. Dr. Henry Bell, I presumed, the man who wanted to help my wife adjust our daughter. After the meeting, I watched them walk to the parking lot together, their heads close in conversation. They stopped beside a silver BMW that probably cost more than I made in a year, and Henry pulled Amelia into an embrace that lasted way too long to be friendly. When they finally separated, I heard Amelia laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months. The sound hit me like a physical blow, not because I was jealous, but because I realized she'd been miserable with me for longer than I'd understood. That should have made me sad. Instead, it just made me more determined to destroy both of them. I spent the next week playing the role of the oblivious husband while secretly documenting everything. Photos of Amelia's text messages, screenshots of the Pure Life Collective's website, audio recordings of her phone conversations, made with a voice memo app on an old phone I kept hidden in her gym bag. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Amelia and Henry weren't just having an affair, they were planning a complete takeover of my life. The retreat center Henry had mentioned was real, a facility in Vermont where families could heal together under the guidance of Pure Life Collective counselors. According to their private messages, the plan was simple. Amelia would file for divorce, claiming I was an unfit father who was endangering Tessa's health with toxic food addiction. She'd request emergency custody, then immediately take Tessa to the Vermont facility for a therapeutic intervention. By the time I could challenge the custody order, Tessa would have been isolated for months, subjected to whatever psychological conditioning these people considered appropriate. Even if I eventually won her back, the damage would be done. But the detail that pushed me over the edge was financial. Amelia had been slowly draining our joint accounts, transferring money to something called the Pure Life Investment Fund. When I dug deeper, I discovered that Henry Bell wasn't just a cult member. He was one of the organization's major financial backers. Using his medical credentials to legitimize their operation, they were stealing my money to fund their own scam, planning to use my daughter as a test case for their child adjustment program, and they were doing it all while pretending to be concerned about her welfare. That's when I decided that legal channels weren't going to be enough. These people had declared war on my family, and I was going to respond appropriately. My first target was Henry Bell himself. I'd done my research on the good doctor. Harvard Medical School, successful practice in internal medicine, divorced with no children of his own. He lived in a downtown condo that probably had more square footage than most people's houses, drove the BMW I'd seen at the meeting, and had a reputation as one of the city's most eligible bachelors. He also had a weakness for dramatic gestures based on his social media presence. Lots of photos of elaborate raw food creations, inspirational quotes about living authentically, and videos of himself giving impromptu lectures about the dangers of processed food. So when I showed up at his office building at 6 p.m. on a Friday, I came prepared. "Dr. Bell," I called out as he walked toward his car in the underground parking garage. "I think we need to talk." He turned around, and I saw recognition flicker across his face. He'd probably seen photos of me, the toxic husband who was standing in the way of true love and spiritual enlightenment. "You must be Will," he said with the kind of condescending smile that doctors practice in medical school. "Amelia's mentioned you." "I bet she has. Probably told you all about how I'm poisoning our daughter with my toxic lifestyle." His smile widened. Children are incredibly adaptable, Will. With the right guidance, Tessa could thrive in ways you've never imagined. The right guidance. Is that what you call it when you plan to abduct someone's kid? No one's talking about abducting. We're talking about healing, about breaking cycles of dysfunction that's when I hit him with the first egg. I'd brought 2 dozen, fresh from the grocery store, along with a bag of the most processed, chemical-laden, spiritually bankrupt food I could find. The egg caught him square in the chest, exploding across his expensive shirt like a yellow protest against everything he represented. What the hell? The second egg got him in the face, followed by a handful of individually wrapped cheese slices that stuck to his beard like plastic prayer flags. He stumbled backward, slipping on the broken shells, his arms windmilling as he tried to maintain his balance and his dignity. "This is attack!" he shouted, but his voice cracked on the last word as I opened a can of Spam and began decorating his BMW with processed meat products. "This is justice," I replied, spelling out "fake doctor" across his windshield with squeezed cheese. "You want to talk about toxic? Let's talk about aggressors who use medical degrees to manipulate vulnerable women and steal children from their fathers." I could have kept going. I had a whole bag of ammunition, but the sound of approaching footsteps told me that security was probably on the way. So I settled for one final gesture. I took out my phone and started recording. "Dr. Henry Bell," I announced to the camera, "wants to take children away from their families and reprogram them at his cult facility in Vermont. He's been having an affair with my wife and stealing money from our joint accounts to fund his operation. Just thought the internet should know what kind of doctor they're dealing with." The video went viral within hours. By Monday morning, Henry Bell's reputation was in ruins. The video had been shared thousands of times, picked up by local news stations, and turned into memes that were probably going to outlive both of us. His medical practice was fielding angry calls from patients who'd seen him covered in processed food products while threatening to steal someone's child. But Amelia's response was swift and vicious. I came home from work to find divorce papers taped to our front door and a restraining order that prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of either her or Tessa. She'd moved out while I was at the office, taking our daughter and most of our belongings, leaving behind only the furniture and a note that accused me of violent tendencies and psychological instability. The legal documents painted me as an abusive husband who'd escalated to stalking and physical attack when confronted with his wife's decision to embrace a healthier lifestyle. According to Amelia's sworn statement, I'd been monitoring her communications, following her to meetings, and threatening her friends with violence. All of which was technically true, but missing some crucial context. I called my lawyer, Fran Morrison, a sharp-tongued woman I'd known since college, who specialized in family law and had a particular hatred for what she called weaponized divorce proceedings. "They moved fast," she said after reviewing the paperwork. "This was planned weeks in advance. The restraining order, the custody filing, even the specific language about your food obsession affecting Tessa's welfare. Someone coached your wife through this process. Henry Bell? Probably. Or someone else in their organization with legal experience. The good news is that restraining orders based on flimsy evidence don't usually hold up under scrutiny. The bad news is that you won't see your daughter until we can get in front of a judge, which could take weeks. What about the video? Doesn't that prove Henry's involvement?" Fran laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "The video proves you attacked someone with breakfast foods. It's not going to help your case for being a stable father figure." That's when I realized I needed to change tactics. The direct approach had felt satisfying, but it had also given them ammunition to use against me. If I wanted to win this war, I needed to be smarter, more strategic. I needed to think like an engineer. The first step was gathering allies. I started with Mrs. Patel, the school nurse who'd been documenting Tessa's condition for weeks. She agreed to testify about Tessa's malnutrition and provided medical records showing the dramatic improvement in her health after just 1 week of normal meals. Next was Ms. Grant, Tessa's teacher, who'd been keeping her own informal records of Tessa's declining performance and energy levels. She also mentioned something interesting. Other parents had been asking questions about the Pure Life Collective after several children had started showing up to school with similar lunch boxes of sadness, as she called them. The cult was expanding its influence, targeting other families with children. Armed with this information, I did something that would have made Henry Bell proud. I went undercover. The Pure Life Collective held open meetings twice a week designed to attract new members. I showed up to the Wednesday evening session wearing my most earnest expression and a story about being a recently divorced father who was seeking a new path to wellness. Mother Gaia herself led the session, and up close, she was even more impressive than her website photos suggested. She had the kind of charismatic presence that could make you believe anything she said, at least until you started thinking critically about the content. "We live in a world that profits from our sickness," she told the assembled group. "The food industry, the medical establishment, even our own families. They all have a vested interest in keeping us weak, dependent, and spiritually disconnected." Nods and murmurs of agreement from the audience. I recognized several faces from my surveillance of Amelia's meetings, including Jess, who was sitting in the front row like a devoted disciple. "But when we choose to live purely," Mother Gaia continued, "we threaten their control. That's why they fight us so hard. That's why they try to use children as weapons against enlightened parents." More nods. I was starting to understand how they justified their actions by casting themselves as persecuted truth-tellers, fighting against a corrupt system. After the meeting, I approached Jess with my cover story. She was more than happy to share details about the amazing transformation she'd witnessed in Amelia, and how wonderful it was that Amelia had finally freed herself from toxic influences. "What about her daughter?" I asked innocently. "It must be hard for a child to adjust to such big changes." Jess's expression grew serious. "Children are the most important part of our work," she said. "They're so pure when they're young, but they get corrupted so quickly by processed food and toxic thinking. The retreat center in Vermont has had amazing success helping families break those cycles." "How long do children usually stay at the retreat center?" "As long as it takes. Some need months to fully detox from their previous conditioning, but it's worth it to see them become their authentic selves." Bingo. I had confirmation that the Vermont facility was real, that they were specifically targeting children, and that they considered indefinite separation from toxic parents to be therapeutic. But the most valuable information came at the end of our conversation, when Jess mentioned that Amelia and Tessa would be attending a special family purification ceremony the following weekend. "It's beautiful," Jess said with tears in her eyes. "Watching a mother and child commit to their pure life journey together. Amelia is so brave to take this step." I smiled and nodded and thanked her for sharing, all while my mind was racing through the possibilities. A public ceremony meant witnesses, documentation, and evidence of what these people were really doing to families. It also meant an opportunity to expose them all at once. The family purification ceremony was held at a rented community center on the outskirts of town, far enough from civilization to avoid casual observation, but close enough to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. I arrived early, dressed in maintenance coveralls I'd borrowed from a friend, and spent an hour setting up hidden cameras in strategic locations around the building. By 7 p.m., about 50 people had gathered in the main hall, including several families with children who looked as pale and undernourished as Tessa had been. The kids sat quietly beside their parents, displaying the kind of unnatural compliance that comes from chronic hunger and psychological manipulation. Tessa was there with Amelia, sitting in the front row wearing a white dress that made her look like she was attending her own funeral. She kept glancing around the room with the wide-eyed confusion of a child who didn't understand why she was there but knew it wasn't good. Mother Gaia began the ceremony with a speech about releasing the bonds of toxic love and choosing spiritual family over biological dysfunction. The parents nodded along while their children stared at the floor, and I felt my anger crystallize into something cold and focused. "Tonight," Mother Gaia announced, "we have a very special family joining our Pure Life community. Amelia Turner has made the brave choice to protect her daughter from the toxic influences that were poisoning their relationship." Amelia stood up, pulling Tessa with her, and walked to the center of the circle. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I could see how much weight my wife had lost, how her clothes hung loose on her frame, how her smile looked more like a grimace. "I renounce the toxic patterns of my previous life," Amelia recited, her voice shaking slightly. "I commit myself and my daughter to the pure path, accepting guidance from our spiritual family." That's when I made my entrance. "I object," I said loudly, walking through the main doors with all the authority I could muster. "And I have some concerns about this spiritual family you're joining." The room erupted in confused murmurs as Mother Gaia's serene expression cracked like a broken mask. Amelia spun around, her face cycling through surprise, fear, and anger in rapid succession. "Will, you can't be here," she said. "The restraining order doesn't apply to public buildings," I replied, pulling out my phone. "And this is definitely a public building, which means this ceremony is being broadcast live to about 2,000 people who are very interested in what happens next." I wasn't actually streaming live, the technology setup was beyond my capabilities, but the threat was enough to freeze everyone in place while I continued talking. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing a child abduction disguised as a spiritual ceremony. These people have convinced vulnerable parents to surrender custody of their children to an unregulated facility in Vermont, where kids are subjected to psychological conditioning and nutritional deprivation." "That's not true," Mother Gaia protested, but her voice had lost its hypnotic authority. "We're helping families heal from toxic—" "You're helping yourselves to their bank accounts," I interrupted, pulling out printed copies of financial records I'd obtained through some creative investigation. "Dr. Henry Bell, your medical advisor, has been funneling money from targeted families into Pure Life Collective investments. Money that pays for your retreat center, your salaries, and your very comfortable lifestyle." I started distributing the documents to parents in the audience, watching their expressions change as they saw the numbers. Thousands of dollars in voluntary contributions and program fees that had been extracted from families who thought they were paying for their children's spiritual development. "This is harassment," Amelia said, but her voice was weak, uncertain. "You're trying to sabotage something beautiful because you can't accept change." "I'm trying to save our daughter from people who think starving children is a form of enlightenment," I replied. "Tessa, sweetheart, do you want to go to the place these people are talking about?" Tessa looked between me and Amelia, her 8-year-old mind trying to process the adult drama swirling around her. Finally, she shook her head and whispered, "I want to go home, Daddy." That's when Mother Gaia made her fatal mistake. "Children don't understand what's best for them," she said coldly. "That's why they need guidance from enlightened adults who can see past their conditioned responses." The room went dead silent. Even the most devoted cult members seemed to realize that dismissing a child's expressed wishes wasn't a good look during what was supposed to be a loving ceremony. I seized the moment. "Everyone here needs to understand what you're really signing up for. This woman wants to take your children away from you, not for days or weeks, but for months or years. She wants to isolate them from anyone who might question her methods, feed them just enough to keep them compliant, and reshape their thinking until they become perfect little disciples." "That's not," Mother Gaia started, but I cut her off. "It's exactly what you told Jess about Tessa's adjustment period. Months of detoxification from previous conditioning. Separation from toxic influences, meaning anyone who loves these children enough to question what you're doing to them." I turned to address the other parents directly. "How many of you have been asked to make financial contributions to the Pure Life Investment Fund? How many have been told that your children need to be separated from family members who don't support the lifestyle? How many have been promised that your kids will be happier once they're fully committed to the program?" Hands started going up around the room. Not all of them, but enough to create a murmur of concerned conversation as parents began comparing their experiences. "This is a business," I continued. "They target families going through difficult times, isolate them from support systems, extract as much money as possible, and then disappear when the authorities start asking questions. Dr. Henry Bell, your medical advisor, is currently under investigation by the State Medical Board for unethical practices. The Vermont Retreat Center has been cited multiple times for health code violations, and Mother Gaia here has been running similar operations under different names for over a decade." That last part was a bluff. I hadn't had time to research Mother Gaia's background that thoroughly, but her expression told me I'd hit close to the mark. The ceremony was falling apart around us. Parents were gathering their children and heading for the exits. Several people were demanding refunds of their contributions, and Mother Gaia was frantically trying to regain control of the situation. But Amelia wasn't ready to surrender. "You don't understand," she said desperately, grabbing Tessa's arm. "This is about saving her from a world that wants to poison her body and her mind. I won't let you destroy her future." "Mom, you're hurting me," Tessa said, trying to pull away. That's when my carefully maintained composure finally cracked. I crossed the room in 3 quick steps and physically positioned myself between Amelia and our daughter. "Let go of her. Now! She's my daughter, too. She's a hungry, scared little girl who wants to go home and eat a normal meal and sleep in her own bed. Everything else is just your psychological problems projected onto an 8-year-old. Amelia's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married instead of the stranger she'd become. I thought I was protecting her, she whispered. You were protecting yourself, I replied, more gently than she deserved, from the responsibility of being a parent, from the complexity of real relationships, from everything that makes life difficult and messy and worth living. The community center had mostly emptied by then, leaving just our small family drama playing out under the fluorescent lights. Mother Gaia had disappeared, probably to start planning her next incarnation in a different city, and the few remaining cult members were huddled together, trying to figure out what to do next. I want to go home, Tessa said again, and this time Amelia didn't argue. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Armed with video evidence from the ceremony, financial records showing the cult's fraudulent practices, and testimony from medical professionals about Tessa's condition, Fran Morrison systematically dismantled every argument Amelia's lawyers tried to make. The restraining order was thrown out when the judge saw footage of Amelia trying to drag Tessa away from the ceremony against the child's expressed wishes. The custody arrangement was reversed when Child Protective Services filed their own report documenting the nutritional neglect Tessa had suffered. But the most satisfying moment came when Dr. Henry Bell took the witness stand to defend his medical advice regarding raw food diets for children. Dr. Bell, Fran said with this kind of smile that made opposing counsel nervous, in your professional opinion, is it medically appropriate to feed a growing child nothing but raw vegetables and sprouts for months at a time? The human body is designed to process natural foods, he replied, trying to maintain his authority despite the fact that his medical license was already under review. Processed foods create inflammation and toxicity that's not what I asked. I asked whether it's medically appropriate to restrict a child's diet to raw vegetables and sprouts. Henry shifted uncomfortably. In the context of a comprehensive wellness program, Dr. Bell, yes or no? Can a child maintain proper nutrition and healthy development on a diet consisting solely of raw vegetables and sprouts? A long pause. Not indefinitely. How long before such a diet would cause malnutrition in a typical 8-year-old? Another pause. It would depend on various factors. Dr. Bell, you're under oath. How long? Weeks, possibly less. The courtroom was dead silent as the implications sank in. This man had been advising parents to feed their children a diet that he knew would cause malnutrition within weeks, all while positioning himself as a medical authority. Fran let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. And in your professional opinion, what are the psychological effects of chronic hunger on a developing child? I'm not a child psychologist, but you did advise the Pure Life Collective on the psychological benefits of their adjustment program for children, didn't you? Henry's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The man who'd presented himself as a medical expert had just admitted that he was giving advice outside his area of expertise on subjects that could cause serious damage to children. The judge's ruling was everything I could have hoped for. Full custody to me, supervised visitation for Amelia, contingent on psychological evaluation and parenting classes, and a restraining order preventing any member of the Pure Life Collective from contacting our family. But the real victory came 3 months later when I organized a school fundraiser that became the stuff of local legend. The Real Food for Real Kids barbecue was held on the same weekend that the Pure Life Collective had planned their next family purification ceremony. Instead of raw vegetables and spiritual manipulation, we offered hamburgers, hot dogs, pizza, and every other toxic food that normal families enjoy together. The entire community showed up. Parents who'd been targeted by the cult brought their children, who ate with the enthusiasm of kids who'd been liberated from dietary prison. Teachers shared stories about the dramatic improvements they'd seen in students who'd escaped the raw food regimen. Even Mrs. Patel, the school nurse, made an appearance and delivered an impromptu speech about the difference between actual nutrition and pseudo-spiritual starvation. Henry Bell made one last appearance, showing up at the fundraiser with a few remaining cult members to protest what he called the poisoning of innocent children. He stood at the edge of the school property with a sign reading, "Processed food, ex-processed minds," while hundreds of families enjoyed themselves just out of his reach. That's when Tessa, who'd gained 15 pounds and grown 2 inches since escaping her mother's pure life, walked up to the fence separating us from the protesters. Dr. Bell, she said in her clear 8-year-old voice, I used to be really hungry all the time when my mom listened to you. Now I'm not hungry anymore and I'm taller and stronger and I can think better in school. So I think maybe you're wrong about food. She turned around and walked back to the picnic table, where her friends were eating pizza and laughing like normal children, leaving Henry Bell speechless behind his protest sign. The local news crew that had come to cover the fundraiser caught the whole exchange on camera. The footage went viral. Again, but this time, it wasn't about my revenge on the people who'd tried to destroy my family. It was about a little girl who'd found her voice and used it to speak truth to the adults who'd tried to silence her with hunger and manipulation. 6 months later, the Pure Life Collective dissolved completely. Mother Gaia disappeared, probably to start over somewhere else with a new name and a new scam. Henry Bell lost his medical license and moved to another state, where he presumably found other ways to exploit vulnerable people. Amelia completed her court-mandated therapy and slowly began rebuilding a relationship with Tessa based on actual parenting instead of ideological control. She never fully admitted that she'd been wrong, but she did apologize for getting confused about what was best. It wasn't the complete vindication I'd fantasized about during the darkest moments of our conflict, but it was something better. It was real justice, and the kind that protects children and holds adults accountable for their choices. And every Sunday morning, Tessa and I make pancakes together, using processed flour and artificial syrup and all the other toxic ingredients that make life worth living. Because sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is just be normal. The end.